Can I start?
Okay, ready? Yeah. 3, 2.
So what do we say for the HLA? Why we took part?
Don't move chin.
So I'm just going to stop.
Just when you end it.
Don't look away.
Yeah,
That is not going anywhere.
Just another day at the office.
Hi, I'm no.
Most important thing is what I've learned from the HLA and adapting it and moving forward and making sure, you know, I make use of it. The reason why I don't know what to say now. If I make a mistake, can I just take a pause and then start again?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Don't really know what to say. Don't record this.
I've really enjoyed it. I've learned so much, and I've really benefited from. Oh God, what have I benefited from? Oh.
Okay.
Is that it's been a fantastic. Oh no, I've lost it.
Can you give me a countdown?
I don't know how much to gesticulate. How much? It's quite a mellow person. I don't know.
I'm ready.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll chop and add some things. We're looking forward to seeing you. Bye-bye.
Hello, welcome to HLA Live. HLA Live is our regular broadcast on the HLA YouTube channel as well as all the other social media channels. Each week we talk to interesting people from across the HLA community.
Good evening, everyone. I am really excited to be chairing tonight's meeting.
Hi, I'm Rosie Spooner and I'm hosting HLA Live this Wednesday.
And I'm an HLA scholar and I'm also going to be your host this evening.
To share with us their ideas and their innovations and hopefully bring them to a global audience.
Quite quick, we have ideas, let's do this, let's do that. So
many of the topics come from our community, with scholars and faculty expressing an interest in many of the discussions that we're about to have.
Hello everyone and welcome to the HLA Live session on widening participation in the postgraduate realm.
Homelessness and health.
Addiction and the new normal.
HLA programs are built on 6 pillars. The leader is an innovator and entrepreneur. The leader is a communicator. The leader is a manager. The leader as a negotiator. The leader is a follower, and the leader is a philosopher. If you are interested in becoming a HLA scholar, why not get in contact? Many of the episodes in HLA Live will cover one or more of these important pillars. The HLA team consists of Pedra, Eamon, Tim, Riddy, Alistair, Adil and Trisha, and a range of other HLA scholars and faculty. Episode 31 of HLA Live is hosted by Karen Thomas and is on interdisciplinary education.
Good evening and welcome to the second part of our Broadening Horizons HLA Live series, focusing on interdisciplinary education and leadership. My name is Karen Thomas. Back from last week, I am a clinical academic physiotherapist and I'm an HLA scholar this year. So tonight we're going to be talking about education, and we have 4 amazing individuals from 4 different professions, all who are leaders, very prominent leaders in their own rights. So to start with, we have Beverly Harden, who I'm sure many of you know. She's a very well-known national allied healthcare professional leader, a physiotherapist like myself by training, and she leads advanced practice and consultant development with Health Education England. She's also a visiting professor at the University of Winchester and has been on many boards and councils across her career. Then moving on to Katerina, again, someone I'm sure many people will know. Katerina is the CEO of the Council of Deans of Health, who influence higher education policy, really push for government funding to support education and research. And she's also in the evaluation of education and research, both here and in many countries internationally. It'll be great to hear her thoughts this evening. Then moving on, we have Andreas, who's here from King's College, London. He's a nurse by background, I should say the profession first, and then also editor-in-chief of the very influential journal, the International Journal of Interprofessional Care. He is also a director at the Centre for Advancement of Interprofessional Education, and he's based in a team at King's that really try and push interprofessional learning on the ground with doctors, nurses, AHPs, and many others. So it'll be good to have his insights from, I guess, the thick of it, and hear what his thoughts are. Then last, but most definitely not least, we have Anne Gates, who is a pharmacist by training, but most of you will know her as the founder and CEO of Exercise Works. Exercise Works supports work across schools of medicine and health in many places around the UK, and are just about to go abroad as well, thinking about Erasmus. And she really looks at how physical activity should be a part of everyone's agendas, no matter the profession they're in. So leading on from that, the first part of this evening is going to be listening to Anne give a case study talking about her Movement for Movement initiative, and then we'll move on to some questions, and I'm sure the discussion will flow from there. So Anne, take it away.
Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and organisation, and welcome to all the people that are part of this Health Academy Live. Some background: we set up the Movement for Movement back in 2014, and its purpose at that stage was to provide a platform, which wasn't in existence then, to enable profound interdisciplinary learning for health and well-being using physical activity as the exemplar. And we set up a Movement for Movement which relied on the social movement in theory and practice of at-scale strategic change by healthcare professionals or future healthcare professionals to deliver a movement option. So I'd just like to give you an overview of the project and where we're at, and also to highlight some very key educational aspects which we're very proud of, but also we wanted to demonstrate that it could be done across all faculties involved in healthcare and the future delivery of healthcare. So some of the key themes that you'll see throughout this presentation are inclusivity, diversity, and non-stigmatizing images. So there's some of the design concepts that we've been very keen to incorporate, and I'm sure you'll all agree that, you know, there are many curriculum that don't hold themselves to those standards within not only the UK but specifically also the international educational arena. So one of the key issues behind the Movement for Movement resources was actually to link in with sort of Andreas's perspective in terms of ensuring that we future-proof our student healthcare professionals to become more adaptable, more enabled to deal with some of the challenges that we know are coming. Now, obviously, this was pre-COVID, but I'd just like to go through some of the big issues in delivering healthcare, not only in the UK but also globally. We knew 20 years ago that non-communicable diseases was going to be a massive issue, and they still are, and they still constitute over 90% of the activity and spend within the NHS. And so at the very least, we set out to ensure that students were competent, confident and capable of delivering appropriate physical activity advice in a personalised care way. And that still is one of the big issues that students are faced with. Patients, on the other hand, are faced with this massive complexity of organisations and care pathways that we felt again was underrepresented in the undergraduate curriculum. And tying into inequity, and I'm very keen on the difference between inequalities and equities, and this slide very clearly demonstrates in physical activity the difference between providing a one-size-fits-all and the NHS ideal of personalised care, which obviously you see in the bottom aspect, which I think is quite important again for that interdisciplinary learning, because it cuts down inconsistencies and improves access to healthcare options. And one of the other big things is this burden of travel towards an older population. And by burden, I mean in terms of health costs and access to health costs, but also the opportunities that healthcare professionals can contribute and right that balance within the system. But one of the things that I learned very early on in my career is that actually it was nothing to do with knowledge. These important drivers are underpinned by some very critical learning and practice, and they include understanding complexity, dealing with ambiguity, facing challenges, making sense of systems that are complex, a moral agency to act when things are wrong, and I'll, sort of like the Francis report in Staffordshire and things like that, an urgency that we've seen with the development of the vaccines, this focus on the differences and nuances between partnership working. And actually the crux of it is working as a diverse, interdisciplinary, interskilled team, which we know it improves patient safety, improves patient outcomes, is a valuable contribution to teamwork and the health and well-being outcomes of the workforce as well. So this is a massive issue that I'm very keen and passionate about and have been throughout my career. But I was also taught when somebody throws you a curveball, then you need to have the systems and contingencies and the ways of working in order to mesh that. And I think that COVID-19 has demonstrated the weaknesses and the strengths in our education system and also in NHS practice. And I think that's what's got to be supported within the undergraduate curriculum if we're going to be rebuilding back better. And again, the WHO in 2020 produced a very key article about stronger collaboration, developing better health and global action plans for healthy lives and well-being. And I think that this should underpin some of the decisions that are being made on the undergraduate curriculum. Looking at physical activity as an exemplar is very easy to do as a healthcare professional, which is why students should be taught it universally as a practice to gain expertise in brief intervention. We know that mentioning physical activity is important in consultations, encouraging older patients. The type of activity is really important. And so this is the start of the Making Every Contact process, and demonstrates in the resources that we use and are used. They went across 81 United Kingdom Council of Deans of Health schools of health. They went to 33 UK medical schools, and they've gone to 5 lead Erasmus countries that we're working with on this particular project. But I think it's very important that we get this right, because this is at scale change, and I think that's tremendously rewarding for interdisciplinary teams that are singing from the same page right at the beginning of their career. The other important aspect is if we train them at the very beginning to understand all those drivers, then we're not losing a 10-year gap between a medic becomes a registrar and has the ability to see, you know, some of the bigger pictures and some of the bigger issues and reach out to other allied health professionals within the team. But it also means that students can start practicing some of these skills and strengthening those networks and communication communication systems. And I think that's why this is so important. And I absolutely love this quote from Wilkes, who's a US medical educator. And he talks about an adequate medical school changes what you know. So this isn't about knowledge, but a great school changes who you are and how you behave. And I can honestly say, was it not for the University of Nottingham, where I did my degree of pharmacy, and also the Derbyshire Royal Infirmary, I didn't know that I could lead. But they made me competent on my pharmacy skills and capable on my interactions with patients and populations to enable me to do things that I didn't ever think possible. And that links in with, you know, NHS entrepreneurship, this caring and sharing across the disciplines to make things happen to improve the quality of our care in the NHS. And I think that's where we're at, because actually you know, it's going to be a big global task to meet the WHO targets, which every nation in the world has signed up to, for physical inactivity. And physical inactivity is a killer. We know even in the UK that we lose 37,000 deaths each year through physical inactivity. So this is core stuff for undergraduate student health professionals. This gives them an opportunity to start embracing, strengthening those systems. So we set up a very different approach. We said, well, look, if they were going for jobs, they'd be looking at essential and desirable criteria. So why don't we synergize the language, the educational language, and their access to the resources in terms of, look, these essential plenaries are the things that you need to look at. You know, if you don't do anything else, then make sure you access and you know, and it's up to the universities to make sure that there are appropriate assessments and included in the examinations, because we know if something's examined at undergraduate level, then it will hopefully be learned, which then leads to a teaching or the interaction with that. So we've got some very key things. Most importantly, you'll see here in desirable, we've included right at the beginning change agency and leadership modules, thanks to Helen Bevan at the Horizons group. And we've also included a different approach, which is a text only. So we've tried to embrace a scenario where we've got shared purpose embedded right at the start, which of course is a lot of the quality improvement work done from the Horizons group. And we've tweaked some of the learning skills and learning objectives very, very carefully to come through that. And what we came up with was we made the decision to embed within the DNA of students the ability to become confident, capable, and competencies, which is knowledge and skills, but then show them the passage of time where they can become patient advocates, but also system advocates as well, which also links in with some of the global and national aspirations. So this is a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of undergraduate learning, and making every contact count is an enshrined quality within the NHS, but also making every influence matter. And I'm sure that Andreas will laugh at this, but my goal was, if I can get a future interventional cardiologist to become excited about changing the physical activity landscape of, for example, cycling and walking infrastructure, then I will have done my job appropriately, because we wanted to shift the emphasis back on prevention and getting upscale as well. So a lot of the resources talk about making every influence matter. We want to strengthen their roles as leaders, as student leaders, and harness that expertise they have at seeing something maybe for the first time, be it a patient or a system or a disease. So I'm going to gloss through this, but you can see that some of our resources have been very highly designed, and we had outside Erasmus funding for the design. But again, you'll see here, our goal was, whoever you are, wherever you are, physical activity is life-saving for your patient. However you do it, what that brief intervention is, and we give a smorgasbord of opportunities for them to feel comfortable with their brief interventions in whatever methodology they want to use. But obviously we align ourselves with the NHS's Making Every Contact Count, which is a 3A's approach. But the most important thing, and this builds on the new recent research, is getting the language practiced and absolutely right to resonate with patients. And I think that this is where we've really pushed the boundary in learning in interdisciplinary. It's like saying it doesn't matter whether you're a student doctor, student radiographer, student physio, the language matters. And so we've been very key on that, and we've highlighted the exact language to use, which we do believe is a global first on undergraduate education. So we've been very explicit so that we then start to build strength in this system of interdisciplinary relationships. We've also included some lovely case studies and real-time examples of where somebody has gone beyond what might be their preconceived idea or scope of practice and said, you can make a huge difference. So again, there's a different flavour of expertise within the slide sets. And we've summarised this in the 6 C's for undergraduate education. And in addition to competencies, capabilities and confidence, we've said that change agency, making those interprofessional connections and having the conversations about, well, you know, does our fracture clinic really deliver and support physical activity for our patients, and exploring some of those at the undergraduate education level through dissertation and practice and everything else. But most importantly, to deliver the system and individual outcomes that the NHS wants and needs. So this is very much future skilling for fit for purpose healthcare professionals. So I'd like to just summarise, you know, we feel that learning, interdisciplinary learning, fosters that working together. I could not imagine being as successful at brief interventions if I hadn't known what my colleagues are also contributing and when to contribute at the right time and the right place, and understanding the flow and the ebb of all those interdisciplinary opportunities. I also think that I mentor a lot of students, and their ability to be our hope carriers of the future are absolutely pivotal and palpable. And I think it's important that we strengthen the leadership system to deliver that. And also this idea of agency, which I'm a very keen advocate and I love on social media, but agency that promotes and protects the health of the patients and the populations. And that's why I think it's important that interdisciplinary learning becomes much more accessible for students and much more focused on this idea of working together in an agency model. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to the EU Erasmus collaboration for funding this project, and also all the patients, families and carers that contributed to the Movement for Movement resources and their use across the medical schools and the schools of health. Thank you.
I think something I wrote down there that really pulled that together was thinking about that shared purpose, and everybody having a shared purpose and making that really clear from early on. So going off the back of that, I guess we'll ask our first question, which is around thinking about what the benefits are. We've spoken about how we might make interdisciplinary education work, but what are the benefits of really pushing this forward, and what barriers are we currently facing that are stopping it being, you know, a staple of education for every healthcare school in the UK? So, Katerina, we'll come to you first.
Thank you. And Anne has given us a fantastic overview and context in terms of where we have been, where we are, and where we are going. And COVID actually, as Anne rightly said, is a catalyst in terms of how we can promote further and a stronger narrative around interdisciplinary, interprofessional, but also I'd like to bring to the fore the question of the multi-setting learning as well. So not learning in one place or in one way, but looking at different methods and different tools, but also in different settings. I think that's very, very important for all healthcare professionals. There are a number of myths, I think, associated with the barriers and the obstacles to interdisciplinary and interprofessional learning. And the first one is that if you go into a multi-professional kind of group of either learning or practice, you lose your own professional identity. And I've heard a lot of students, particularly from allied health professions, but also within nursing, midwifery, and medicine, where they feel that if they are presented as being part of the allied health professions, they then lose their own profession and they get lost, particularly for those who come from smaller number. Bev will totally recognize what I'm talking about. I'm sure she'll pick it up later. I would suggest that actually that's not true, and bringing people together from across disciplines, ensuring that they're learning, particularly around leadership, which is a theme of this evening's talk, adds value. And the reason why it does is because you can share examples of best practice across the different professions, and ultimately everybody in healthcare is there to protect the public, to look after their patients and clients, to promote good health, to promote public health. And there isn't anything like I'm only here in my own little isolated area. So I think it is very possible to have both a multi-professional approach to learning, to education, to research, to lifelong learning, and your own professional identity clearly identified as part of that. Second myth, I think, is about how we get bogged down to the detail and the process rather than looking at the outcomes. So every time I asked students or educators or other parts of the system, whether it is a funder, a commissioner across the UK, a government, a public body, a regulator, they'll say, oh, it's very difficult because we've got all these processes to follow, we've got all these standards to meet, we've got all these curricula to develop, we've got all these partners we have to work with. We can't possibly do this. We can't possibly bring all these students from all these disciplines and all these kind of departments. And people tend to talk process. But I'm very enthused by the fact that universities, in particular with all their practice partners across the professions, have actually moved from that almost reactive narrative to a much more proactive narrative of ensuring that and understanding the value of bringing all the professions together in terms of education. There will be areas where it will be important for students to learn in a particular group with other students. There will be areas where cutting across and looking at things more horizontally, bringing students from across departments, will help. So I think changing the mindset from process to outcome and using different methods and more innovations to bring more professions together is definitely useful. And finally, mobilizing and empowering the students themselves. What we have seen at the Council of Deans of Health through our 150 Leaders Programme, which is, as you know, a partner of HLA, we work very closely on many projects and initiatives. What we have seen through this programme is that you put the students together from across 70 universities in our case, across the UK, across professions. We've got over 16 or 17 professions of students, different years, and they just do it. You talk leadership and they will bring their own example from their own profession, but they will actually demonstrate and discuss attributes, values, behaviors, objectives in a very, very similar way, and in a very, very similar language. So I think it is possible, it is also valuable, and it can be very successful. There is more we can do as a system, and I'll pause there because I know more colleagues want to come in, to promote all the professions at the same time and in the kind of a similar way. We shouldn't be talking about just doctors and nurses, if I pick up this as an example, because this is the narrative that we use a lot in the media, particularly in the news. I mean, that's all I hear about at the moment. But again, COVID, as I said, has been a catalyst, and it has showcased and promoted a number of other professions in a very meaningful way. I'm sure the average member of the public wouldn't have thought of a physiotherapist as part of the rehabilitation agenda, for example. If I'm going to pick an example, they think of physiotherapists in a completely different context, usually related to sport, because that's kind of the marketing side of things. I'm sure people will not have thought about the role of speech and language therapy for a patient that comes out of ICU, or the role of a dietetics professional that will play in that kind of rehabilitation and going back to home after COVID kind of journey. So there is loads we can do to promote that ethos and the value of all the professions. But I would leave it also to the empowerment of students as part of that, because there's loads they can do as well. It's not what we do to them, it's more what we do with them.
Thank you, Katerina. And Andreas, I think you can probably relate to quite a few points that came up there, thinking about your role at King's. So we'll come to you next.
Absolutely. I mean, Anne gave us a really excellent case study there. And Katerina followed up with some really excellent points as well. I guess for me, with my sort of educator's hat on, but also as a service user, I think. So I expect the health professionals who are caring for me to work collaboratively in the health service, and for health profession students to be ready for collaborative practice on graduation. And I think many of us, we expect our care to be coordinated and comprehensive. We expect continuity of care. I mean, I certainly expect my care providers to communicate with each other, share information and expertise, and come up with a care plan for me that is both holistic and person-centered. But to meet these expectations, we require professionals who understand and respect each other's unique skills, knowledge, and expertise, and who know how to take advantage of those complementary skills to ensure high quality, safe, coordinated care. Yet, there is actually minimal investment in teaching and preparing health professional students about interprofessional collaborative practice, about teamwork and interprofessional communication. And there is in fact minimal opportunity built into the curriculum for students to socialize across health professionals programs, to get to know each other. So interprofessional education as the pedagogic innovation of learning with, from, and about other professions to improve collaborative practice. I mean, this has been discussed by policymakers, by advocates, regulators, educators, researchers, everyone for decades. It's not new. And some progress has been made, yes, but we still have a very, very long way to go. Yes, so there's different regulatory requirements. There is seemingly incompatible curricula. And as Katerina rightly mentioned, challenges with timetabling and orchestrating classes with large numbers of health profession students. And all these are really, they're commonly blamed for this slow implementation and growth of interprofessional education. However, at the heart of the issue, I think, still lies a really strong tradition of silo teaching, of professional competition, of financial and power differentials. And unfortunately, we still see some traces of professional elitism and territorialism, when in fact, professional humility is what we should really be focusing on.
That's great. Cool. Thank you, Andreas. So I think this is a nice opportunity We've thought a lot about undergraduate education there. I think, Beverly, lots of points have been made, so it'd be interesting to hear your take on them with your background.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Karen. Fascinating conversation. Thank you to all three colleagues. I love that Anne's profound immersion in interdisciplinary learning. Absolutely, Anne. And I think what's really fascinating, I spend a lot of my time working in the emotional soup of the professions. And I use that term deliberately because it is an emotional soup. Andreas, what you said was absolutely spot on. It's a huge challenge of competition, protectionism, fear. If we train with each other, we become each other. We're going to become this sludge of workforce, and I'm a very passionate physiotherapist, and I want you to know that. So for me, this is absolutely the crux of what we need to do. I don't think we should sugarcoat it, because 21st century populations are going to need 21st century teams. And so therefore we have a duty to create those professionals from the minute they think, I want to be whatever I want to be when I grow up, until I become that person and thrive in that place. And I have the joy of working across all of the professions. Today I've spent the time speaking across medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, science, AHPs, nursing, midwifery, you name it, we're there. Psychology, we're talking to people about what it means to advance their practice. But what's really fascinating across all of that is that so many of the professionals are not confident of their USP. What makes me, Beverly, the physiotherapist, me, Beverly, the physiotherapist? As I can be a wife, a mother, a daughter, and a friend, I can also be a physiotherapist, an advanced practitioner, a clinician and respiratory. I can do all those things because I know who I am to be a physiotherapist. And I know about my other colleagues, I value my other colleagues, I see parity and equity in what we do together. I don't see competition. And that comes back to your shared purpose, Anne. My shared purpose is the development of population health in whatever form that takes. And so for me, it's about the first thing really for us around the benefits of this is we've got to be able to liberate the professions, which means understanding our strengths and our USP, so we can sustain our identity, but then become what we need to become to meet the needs of our population. So we need to learn about each other, and the magic of interdisciplinary learning at whatever stage you do it. And we're involved in it from pre-registration right the way through to the highest levels of practice. It's how do we learn about what each other does, what we bring to that population health agenda. And I spend, again, a huge part of my day job working with people who just fundamentally don't understand the enormous skill we have across every single profession that we've got, how clever and intelligent and amazing these professions are, and yet we box them off and use only a fraction of their genius because either we don't know or we're scared of them. If I liberate them, what's going to happen? How am I going to contain that genie when it's out of the bottle? Well, my point is we need every single genie out of every single bottle, and we are absolutely capable of being able to manage that so long as we are very clear in what the professions are here to do, what the opportunities are to work collegiately across the professions, but to liberate that full potential to our populations. And we do that by, I believe, at every stage across our evolution as professionals, being able to have the opportunity where it is the right thing to do. And Catherine made the brilliant point, it's not always the right thing to be in the interdisciplinary space, because sometimes, if I'm a pharmacist, Anne, I want to be able to learn to be a pharmacist. I need to learn the stuff that makes me a pharmacist, but I can also learn a lot of other things together with everybody else. So it's about how do we create opportunities across all aspects of our pillars of practice to learn together. So we learn either at the bedside, in the consulting room, in the community together, in the classroom together, doesn't matter where it is. But we learn to build respect of one another, we learn to value one another, and we learn how amazing we each are and value and respect each other for it. So if we put all the dentists together to learn at a pre-registration level with the dental technicians, the dental hygienists, the dental therapists, we don't create a dental unidentified tribal sort of morph of workforce. We create brilliant dentists who know exactly what the dental hygienist can do. And so when they work in practice together, they liberate that person's full potential to the workforce and to the population. Then we have cracked interdisciplinary learning, but we need to do that at every level, and everybody take the opportunity to learn and build that understanding and respect. And when we get that to that point, then we are going to deliver the care our populations need.
Thank you, Beverly. That's brilliant. And I think the points you made there about thinking on a bigger scale were really important. And also we've spoken a little bit about the different settings where interdisciplinary education can be delivered. Anne, I know you've had lots of experiences and lots of different settings and different groups. You might want to add something.
I think that all the speakers have identified the huge, humongous potential that interdisciplinary adds, not only amongst each individual profession, but also to the outcome of patient and population health. By working together, by respecting each other, by sharing compassion and empathic holistic care together, we get the most out of everybody. It isn't just one siloed elitist approach. But I do, I've experienced some of the challenges in that. The University of Nottingham has tried to get together 400 students all under the same roof, all to learn about physical activity. Thank God COVID has been an enabler, because they've all had to sort the IT out. It's great, and we're going to do that in the autumn. But they did it without asking the Faculty of Nursing. And so it's like, well, hang on a second, I'm the speaker. How can how is it only for physios and sports rehabbers and medics? What happened to the nurses? What happened to the midwives, who I work very closely with at the University of Nottingham? So this idea of providing an environment where that does work together, that does naturally come, I'm passionate. I agree with Katerina. It has to be student-led, but it's difficult because they don't know what these other professions can provide. So it's like, we just want to stay in our little pharmacy group or whatever. But the problem is that I think it needs to be dean-led, because they're often deans of faculty of medicine and health. And that coming together is where I think the sweet spot is. I think we have to recognise that we are producing healthcare professionals. Yes, they might go on to do research. Yes, they might go on to work in a whole variety of different opportunities and professional environments. But actually, the undergraduate healthcare curriculum has to deliver on being fit for purpose for providing workforce capacity within the NHS. That's really our raison d'etre. And so the other things have this ambiguity. There's this interplay of, are we actually teaching the students what they really do need to learn? Or are we, again, it's this flux. Are we advocating the best for our university research program? Are we showcasing, very niche, siloed, clinical sides of the curriculum, the content? And certainly when we visited the medical schools, we visited 16 medical schools, and that was a very obvious challenge. That relevance in the curriculum was a real challenge. With linking to what Katerina was saying, was actually what the students wanted was access to the resources, was to be able to have a quick win within themselves as saying, yes, I think physical activity has a real role here. But without them being taught it, they couldn't then take it further. So I think there needs to be a much better synergism. And I think the debate is where's the exemplars? How best is that done? How best is it achieved? Where are the students shining on their leadership? And the example I go, if I went back to 1983, I didn't know what I'd been taught. I didn't know I was going to be a leader. But somehow they packaged it just right. And I can't underestimate how important that was in my leadership journey. But that's not just N equals 1. It has to be for all students equitably and inclusively. And I think that's the challenge. So yes, I agree with what everybody's saying. The future and how we make this happen, I think we've got to get just right.
I think we spoke a lot about professional identity and challenge to professional identity through this idea of interprofessionalism. But in fact, we now know through a growing and body of research in different countries that with careful scaffolding and exposure and quality in the professional educations, students do develop a dual identity, able to identify with their own professions and with a larger collective. There needs to be a more nuanced approach and more structured and sophisticated approach to the way that we deliver interprofessional education, for sure, that doesn't compromise professional identity, but helps people develop into that dual identity.
I guess that takes us on to our next question, just thinking about all of these topics that have been discussed and what needs to happen in, say, the next 5 years, both pre and post registration, to make some of these things happen. So having the patient at the centre, everyone, as you were saying, Beverly, really understanding what their role is, and bringing it all together. So Anne, maybe we'll come back to you to start with, what your thoughts are going forward.
I think that time is of the essence. I love the idea of nuanced scaffolding. I love that language. I think this is something that we've been hit with. COVID is worse because of these multi-morbidity NCD issues and lots of other aspects which relate to deprivation, poverty and inequities. We have to give that landscape. So over 5 years, as a planner, I always say, if you've got a 5-year plan, forget that. It's what you do in the first year that's going to count. And I love the fact that, Helen Bevan talks about forget 3-year plans or forget 3-year dissertations or whatever, do 30, 60-day and 90-day change agency plans. And I think we need to allow the system to take up Andreas's, nuanced, enabling environment. And there's clever people around that can do that. I'm sure we all saw on social media the brilliant interplay between Weetabix and Heinz baked beans. Oh my God, I had nightmares. I seriously did. But that's clever marketing. They brought people and brands and out of the woodwork within a space of 90 minutes on social media. And I think we need to learn about how communications moved on, how schools of medicine and schools of health need to I can't remember what Beverly's this Brownian motion, whatever you like to call it. We need a starter like the Weetabix baked beans issue that suddenly brings people together, actively contributing and exploring the relationships, exploring the unique selling points that we each have. And it's really interesting because I'm a pharmacist, as Beverly alluded to. I'll always be a clinical pharmacist. You cannot take that. That is my unique identity. But I morphed through leadership in realizing that at scale change meant that I had to learn different skills, meant that I had to take one body of skills and move them into a different sector to move the agenda forwards. And that adaptability is what we need to be teaching in month 1 of semester 1, in year 1. Because that sets the scene then that it's not going to be so siloed, and it allows the students, as Katerina implied, to actually lead on their own learning and actually access the resources. Let's see what resources they're accessing, and there's some clever tech that lets you do that. Let's monitor the conversations, and by that in discussion forums and tutor groups, and let's start untwining some of this complexity. Let's have a clearer framework or scaffolding. But I would challenge the timescales, because that's what COVID and non-communicable diseases will force us to do. And so, to me, it's not a 5-year plan. It's what are we going to do to make this happen in the next 5 minutes. So that's my challenge, because I know that if you start, then you succeed. And I also know that if you aim to do something in 5 years, but do it in a year, that's got to benefit patient care and also this culture within the NHS. So that would be my challenge, is 5 minutes, 5 months, 5 years? How are we going to make it happen? Who's going to make it happen? And how do we create this organic flux of adaptability and growth mindset and entrepreneurship within the students? And the fact that I know these people, you know, the fact that I can pick up the phone and have a conversation was pivotal in a lot of the things that I did. And the support that you get as a pharmacist is phenomenal, because people ring you up as well and say, can you do this? Or, you know, can you come and see this patient for? So that intermixing to the benefit of patient care is all catalyzed. And that's why I love the NHS. That's what is so intrinsically special and unique about being a healthcare professional. But I think it starts day one, semester one, undergraduate level, and we grow it, and we grow our leaders at the end of 3 or 4 year courses. They become the confident, competent, capable professionals with respect and care for their fellow professionals and patients as well.
Andreas, I think, should we come to you next, just to think about the things which Anne said there, and think about, as you're kind of on the ground in a university, what your thoughts are in implementing some of those things?
I mean, I just love Anne's passion and enthusiasm. I mean, it's so contagious. And you know, there's lots of things that need to happen. I mean, to be honest, I've never encountered a clinician to speak against team-based care, or who thinks collaboration is to be avoided. I mean, perhaps there are some that do, but in my experience on the shop floor, people want to feel part of the team, to feel supported, secure, welcomed, valued. So frontline clinicians, in my experience, do not require convincing. And I think neither do sort of later year health profession students who've been exposed to practice and to quality interprofessional education. And there's lots of examples of that in literature. I think the main challenge lies with those who are distanced from everyday practice and from patient care, but who do make the important decisions, nevertheless. So obviously, changing the way funding and commissioning decisions have historically been taken, I mean, it's not easy, but it is needed to push through this agenda. And adjusting professional regulatory systems and processes is also not easy, but it is needed. It's needed to create a policy and a regulatory context, an environment in which interprofessionality, interprofessional education, collaborative practice are clearly supported, valued, and celebrated, and an environment that empowers all health professions to perform at their fullest potential, and also empowers educators to move outside traditional structures and pursue more innovative, inclusive, collaborative approaches like Anne discussed. So in the next 5 years or 5 minutes, we need to work and support those who make those important decisions at the very top. But we also need to work with the public, I think, to help them understand the role and value of the different health professions. And in doing so, help break down some of those stereotypes that are so firmly rooted in pre-professional education and amongst our first-year students. So try and change those before that first year. And actually, I think if we can start to make a difference, to tackle that legal, policy, and public arenas, then I think the workplace arena, so the front line, I think they will happily follow suit. Now, of course, I'd love to say that we can do all of that in 5 minutes. That might be a little bit challenging, but definitely together, we can definitely give it a shot.
I think, Katerina, as you have experience with working with those policymakers and the people higher up, Andreas was talking about there, be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on how achievable that might be.
Bev talked about genies and innovation. In using a metaphor here, I see this as a set of keys that you have to go and start unlocking doors, I think. And I think Andres and Anne gave it all, really. What I was planning to say for this is that the solutions are both formal and informal. They're both top down and bottom up. And leadership plays in all of this. Good leadership, both in terms of government and regulation and public bodies in a public body setting. System leadership. How do we ensure that we have students from all professions in primary care, for example, equally valued to be able to have a placement in a general practice setting, for instance? How do we ensure that all professionals are equally valued in terms of their contribution to research, so that when we have a research excellence framework set of areas and priorities, that all professions are equally prioritized, and the equity, I think, example that Anne talked about in research is very, very important and valid. And so I think if we look at the system as a whole and use the narrative that all professions make a very important contribution, there is no hierarchy here. There is not better or worse. There isn't bigger or smaller profession. If we start from that basis, then the funding should flow in a similar kind of value. The prioritization in terms of policy should follow and flow in a similar way. The regulations should flow. As an example, I would think that I'm not a healthcare professional by background, I'm a social scientist. So I think in an interdisciplinary sense, from politics to anthropology and sociology, all the time, and I observe a lot of the behaviors of the healthcare professionals I interact with, particularly the academics and of course the deans who are my members. And I note that where you have very good leadership, and we have excellence in leadership in many, many universities, this has already happened. And what I have seen deans do in many universities is they look at the regulations and you say, right, so I have to work with 4 or 5 different regulators. I appreciate this is complex. They look to their team and they say, find me an innovation, because I'm very keen to ensure that all my students learn about consent, for instance, and leadership in the same way. I appreciate that the pharmacist has to learn some skills which are very different to the physiotherapist. I'm not planning to teach midwifery to a speech and language therapist, for instance, but we can all teach consent, leadership, communication, team working, to all of them. And I know a lot of deans and leaders in higher education and in research that have done that very successfully. And it took that moment of innovation and the genie moment that Bev was talking about that brought these people together to do that. But I do also believe that it doesn't take one leader or one extraordinary innovator to get to that point. It takes a whole system. And I think Andreas talked about that a lot. And if we want governments to, and I talk of governments because I talk in 4 UK country context, of course, as well. If we are all 4 governments to prioritize multidisciplinary and multi-professional learning, then the leaders of the professions have also to speak in those terms. And we shouldn't be talking about our own profession in isolation. It's very important that we get that narrative right and then play it back to governments for them to then make their decisions in policy terms, in commissioning terms, in finance, in funding terms, because at the moment it's not like that. And I think Andreas spoke about the regulatory and the education barriers, but there are indeed funding and financial barriers that are quite significant here. And there is hierarchy of the professions, some professions more prioritized than others, some numbers being attached to specific professions as targets, and that doesn't help that whole narrative of everybody working together. And finally, it's the promotion and marketing. I think Anne spoke about that very, very much. We have to be clever about how we sell the professions as a group, as a family, but not as isolated members of a family.
Great. And then coming to Beverly, lots has been said already, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. And we spoke a lot about undergrad education and then policy and high level. If there's anywhere in the middle with your area of work that we could make changes.
Thanks, Karen. So I think I'm absolutely with Anne. We've got to get a wiggle on with this because there's work to do, and I would argue that the clock is ticking. And you know, Catherine is completely right. This is about the policy driving the direction that we need to see. And I would argue that the long-term plan published back in January last year, gave us the strategic direction which sets the scene for interdisciplinary everything. We spent hours working to try and position pieces of thinking around being able to absolutely establish the modern team, wrapped around the needs of a population, harnessing the potential of all. We have the primary care work, bringing 26,000 different professionals into the proud occupational therapists, proud podiatrists, proud dietitians to offer their USP into that mix to be able to give people a better experience of care. The dietitian putting the person with IBS back in control of their symptoms, whereby they never need to go into a gastroenterology waiting list because they've been managed beautifully in primary care, seeing the expert in that place. So I would suggest that we have absolutely got the long-term plan set up, not only to establish care models that are able to deliver interdisciplinary models of care, which then enables us to train together, learn about each other and respect each other. But we also have the scene setting of the long-term plan, which is about valuing diversity, the equity of opportunity for all, absolutely, and beyond the protected characteristics as well. This is about setting the cultural tone of the NHS that says, actually, this is no longer doctors and nurses. This is about all of us, whoever we are, whatever we do. And all of us who've worked clinically know that the most important person in any healthcare team in a hospital is the porter, because without that, everything stops. And so actually our team is everybody. So I would say that we have absolutely got the moment here to drive this change. But Andreas is right, no experienced clinician needs to be persuaded of this. They know it. The challenge though is we're all very happy to work in multi-professional, interdisciplinary ways, work differently, learn differently, whilst we all stay in our hierarchical positions within that team. So long as I always know that as a physiotherapist, I'm better than you and you're better than me, and you know, we know where we sit, we can do really well. The real challenge is, and forgive me, Karen, for being slightly, mixing up a bit perhaps at this point, but the real challenge is when we start through our interdisciplinary learning and our different ways of working to spot opportunity where we can do things differently, work differently. We have radiographers that routinely are now reporting x-rays and radiology services. We have, people stepping into roles that have historically been done by others. We've always done that. That's the beauty of the evolution of professions. However, the challenge there then is that really does start to bring into the mix anxiety, professional identity issues and challenges, which then also then threatens interdisciplinary learning and creates every profession to pull up their drawbridge the minute they feel threatened by the environment around them. So I would suggest to you that although we have the most incredible policy setting now to drive this work home, we also potentially have the pushing of boundaries that's going to make it potentially as challenging as it has ever been. And I think there's a real need in that next 7.5 minutes to drive some fundamental changes in how we see education training. And the work we're doing around advancing practice is about bringing people together to train together, learn together, to create that versatile, adaptable workforce we need, but still as proud speech therapists, proud pharmacists, proud scientists, but in a context. And we've invited CAPE, Andreas's organisation, in to give us a health check, because we want to know that we're doing it right. And it's a really difficult thing to do well. The risk is we do it bluntly and we reinforce or we create drawbridge pulling up rather than create these absolutely well-skilled clinicians who are able to live in that dual world of being a proud whatever I am and a proud whatever I need to be, and I can be both. So I think there's some real opportunity and some real challenge in the next 5 years. But I think if we can establish some exemplars in pre-reg, postgraduate education and training that we can herald and to build the evidence base for and proudly show we're not creating a sludge, a workforce of hybrids. We're creating an important population-facing workforce that is able to live in that dual space. And that's our challenge. So Andreas, we need some serious help, sir, but it's about really trying to build that momentum, I think, is the key for us, Karen.
I'd be interested to hear how you think that could then move back to the undergraduate and the teaching. So maybe, for example, Andreas was speaking about those first and second years who are trying to teach all different things. Would you also be suggesting that those new roles and those messages you're trying to bring across higher up, making sure there are role models possibly further down?
I think that the key for me is about absolutely enabling our learners to look ahead into their careers and see the value and the opportunity of interprofessional learning and development, and to be part of those conversations and to be on student placements with people of different professions, seeing different people working. But whilst you have to be signed off, potentially go back to the regulation and the order again, if you have to be signed off by a certain profession, how can I as a nurse go and be looked after by a paramedic on clinical placement because they can't sign my paperwork? Well, maybe we need to move into a space where we're able to flex and change and value and work collegiately together. And you see it happening. We've got pockets of brilliance across the country. We just need more of it, or we need to make it visible, and we need to think differently. I mean, Karen, you were talking on social media recently about our research placements that we're doing as a beautiful example of matching people with different settings, different scenarios in different ways, so that we're able to really start to enable people to see the different opportunities and to value each other from the beginning. So it's not just in the universities we need to achieve this interdisciplinary thinking, it's in clinical placement, it's in everything we're doing. But if we're not role modeling it as established clinicians in practice, it feels incredibly strange for the students to be forced together into, I used to have a physio and OT department that I was bringing together back in 1,000 years ago. And into that setting of two different professional groupings, I brought an interdisciplinary group of students on placement to do a project around working together. Lovely. But I was bringing an interdisciplinary group of students into a workforce that wasn't an interdisciplinary workforce. That feels a little bit wrong, to be frank. So how do we start to value it across everything we do and understand that we are setting the tone that they're coming into? We need them to see that we appreciate it as much as we expect it of the environments within which they train.
You see, I think this is very interesting, and it links into this idea of shared purpose. I think there's a little bit of unsyncing because we haven't firmed in this shared purpose. My shared purpose is to protect and promote the health of my patients and the population. That's almost like, it's almost such a carte blanche that people forget that's what ties us all in together. That shared purpose ties into our values and belief systems. So when there is disquiet between certain groups or vulnerabilities that come to play, I think that's, to me, a sign that the shared purpose is not as shared as it could be. And so I think it's absolutely crucial, and I'm probably being a bit contentious here, but I'm going to be. But, the long-term plan didn't actually make that very clear. It gave pointers that were really great on moving forwards, but the core shared purpose, that strength of vision, I think was viewed differently by the professions, and there was a little bit of turbulence in the system because it was very different. And and Karen will appreciate this. A good sailor always, you pull in your sail. You take a different tack, and you recover. Or sometimes, God forbid, you have to do a man overboard scenario because your plans have all gone overboard. But I think that the will of a university to skill the future healthcare professions of the future is their raison d'etre. And I think, as Katerina says, there's some absolutely brilliant leadership in the schools of health. I felt that in the work that we've done. Andreas's work, I want to connect with you and talk about the movement for movement resources later, but it's how we pull it all together in a system that makes us so much more than our unique selling points. That value of having others in your team, that value of knowing, and I totally agree, the porter was the most important person in the whole of the hospital, was in 1983, still is. It's knowing that if you are uncertain about something, like a physio may be uncertain about medication that the patient's setting, that they can ring the pharmacist up. There's not this professional barrier. And to me, that's where the magic, the genie comes, the magic, that entrepreneurship, that moving forwards of healthcare as a system is so important. And I think that even if you look at leadership terms, relationships, values, beliefs, they trump culture and strategy and policy every day for breakfast. And I think that we've really got to get some experts into this relationship building and understand that actually we have a very strong shared purpose that most other industries don't have, and that needs to be really, you know, given some teeth and some momentum, because that means that we belong to each other. That means that we're tied stronger through family than our own individual needs. And I think that to me is quite important to, and I can say this, you know, I love being a pharmacist. I never wanted to be a physio, even though I went into exercise and movement. I'm sorry, Beverly, I know, but genetically my son somehow got that short straw. But you know, my son's a physiotherapist, by the way, but I held on to that belief, and it is a flex, but that makes me unique and I can contribute in a different way, so I'll never lose that. But when you're working in a multidisciplinary team and you've got a patient with, for example, a fungating tumour who's at palliative care, and it requires all the assets that you have to pull in to make that a good end of life quality decision, that's when we'll know we've got it right. Or the other example, the interventional cardiologist. I will feel that I can retire and be really happy, and lots of other people think this way as well, when we've got not a treatment disease focused health system, but a health system that focuses on what makes people well and happy and mentally strong and mentally robust. So, you know, there's some real contributions there from everybody that I think needs to happen in 5 minutes. That's my challenge.
And then I guess with so much has been covered this evening, so this will be an impossible task, but it would be great if each of you could just share some thoughts to end, to bring this together, maybe have a think about work which you think should be done going forward, and also thinking about our listeners, so some take-home points for them to make a difference going forward. Andreas, let's start with you.
I mean, I'm so encouraged. This has really been such a rich discussion, and I'm really pleased to see so much support from such, you know, great speakers. I used to be an intensive care nurse, so I have always been very sensitive to the importance of interprofessional collaborative practice. And more than my personal experience of, you know, in intensive care, there's been large-scale research evidence since the 1980s that showed that units with stronger team practices deliver superior outcomes for patients and family members, and units with poor team practice, you know, they feature higher death rates and poorer outcomes. So I know very well that good interprofessional collaborative practice enabled through interprofessional education throughout a professional's career can really make a difference to patient care. It's just really encouraging to just see wider interest and support from this panel, especially. In terms of sort of concluding, I don't want to repeat myself. Perhaps I want to highlight, I think, something I haven't mentioned, that we now have decades of research on teams and teamwork. And all that research has clearly shown that placing different people together in a room doesn't make them a team. And calling them a team doesn't make them a team. And teamwork in everyday practice, it doesn't just happen, no matter how much we wish for it. But there is now a rich, evidence-based curriculum on how to foster teamwork attitudes and skills among the health professions. And we need to take better advantage of that knowledge space. And interprofessional education as a distinct educational approach that I argue moves beyond shared learning. But interprofessional education, despite all the support, sometimes it still feels like an afterthought, like a nice extracurricular activity for the students, a luxury even. And I think we need to move past that. And as the speakers have said, you know, we need to get a move on here. I think it's time that we acknowledge, that we accept that weak interprofessional practice risks the quality, continuity, and efficiency of patient care and compromises patient safety and clinical outcomes. We need to be honest with that. And yes, it is time. Let's turn rhetoric into reality. Let's start to imagine a process of redesigning health professions education, and as the other speaker said, health workforce planning. Redesign around patient and community needs rather than profession-specific priorities. A process that places interprofessional education at the heart of health professionals' learning, practice, and continuing professional development. And I think the responsibility for doing this lies with everyone. You know, whether someone is a pre-registration student, an early career professional or researcher, a university lecturer, we must all work together collaboratively to, I think, ensure a happier and resilient health workforce. Good teamwork does make people happier. And I think by having a happier, resilient, stronger health workforce, by extension, that will help to create a stronger national health service. So I agree with everyone. Let's get going. Let's make a difference.
I think my final thought is that universities are hubs of innovation. We have a COVID vaccine thanks to international research that came out of universities. We know about the different variants of COVID because of the great genomic science, again, across universities, both in the UK, well, there is leadership in this area, but also through international collaboration and research across the world. So my point is one where we just have to see what universities have been able to do over the last 12 months and just wait and see what will happen in the next 6 months. I'm very keen on Anne's short-term and quick and result-focused, kind of next 6-month period, just to see how things will have changed already. I'm very hopeful that actually the discussion we're having tonight, we could have it next year or even in 9 months' time, and we will already have seen change, because students were deployed on longer and extended placements across the UK last year, over 25,000 of them. I'm talking both in the area of nursing midwifery, less so in allied health, but medical students as well have supported very much the workforce and other professions and disciplines as well. Through that learning, there were, I know Andreas referred to ICU and ITU, they were all working together as part of the support to the pandemic. Currently, they're testing their fellow students in universities daily. Healthcare students are there doing the frontline testing for their colleagues. They are part of vaccination teams. These are experiences that they will stay with them forever. And they are interdisciplinary and multi kind of faceted experience, because they're doing it not just as a nursing student or a physio student or a pharmacy student, they're doing it together. And I think that will bring the catalyst. We know that crisis brings change. We've seen it over the years, and I'm hopeful that the pandemic will actually give us some really, really good outcomes, both in terms of the students and what they've learned, despite the difficulties, despite the very extremely challenging circumstances they found themselves in, but also for the educators who had to switch on, switch off curricula, turn them around in a weekend to change them, yet to change them again, to the academic leaders and deans who had to create guidance for how they're going to run their university, how they're going to run a skills lab, why they have X number of students on placement, Y number of students in an online lecture theatre kind of setting on Zoom, and another number of students on a skills lab on campus. So all those kind of very complex scenarios, I think, have probably brought people together, and they've probably brought the thinking together as well. I mean, look how we are today. We are on Zoom across all sorts of places where we all are based today, talking across professions, talking across settings, talking across our different jobs. And, imagine that the lecture theatre of today is also one where you can bring the students from across not just faculties or your own university, but I would suggest across universities and even across the world. And you can bring an academic from Canada, which is what we did yesterday when we had our research. I hope you are watching and following our research month, Karen. You promised me you would. You know, at the Council of Deans of Health Research Month, we had about over 150 participants listening to an academic talking about international research from Canada. You know, we wouldn't have had those things. And we didn't even think about doing those things. We were flying people over for a 1-hour lecture. And I think that will bring the catalyst. Innovation is happening now, and let's watch it and let's see what happens in the next 6 to 9 months.
Great, thank you, Katerina. I think that's a really positive message, definitely. And again, links back in some ways to what Anne was saying about that change needing to happen straight away. As she said, it's already happening in front of our eyes. So should we come to Beverly, if that's okay, next?
Thanks, Karen. So I think the fascinating part of the COVID time has been that mask wearing in clinical practice has broken down barriers in a way that we've never seen before. Suddenly you can't see who somebody is, and it's really fascinating seeing people identifying themselves in different ways, which is beautiful. But actually, despite that, the masks, the PPE broke down barriers, and because it was, as Katerina rightly says, a time of crisis, we had shared purpose in spades. Everybody got to work, everybody gave of their best to those populations and continue to do so with a huge admiration. The challenge is when we have seen pauses in the challenging times, we have seen retrenchment of professional behaviours, and some of them have been in a recoil way, which has been to almost overcorrect the loss of hierarchy, the loss of professional, I'm going to call it boundaries, it's probably the wrong technical term, but we've got to a point where we got to a very, very enabling environment. Clearly it was in crisis, so therefore there's always going to be a need to go back to a different and established way of working. But we saw quite an interesting sort of retrenchment. And I think what is fascinating about that is that absolutely we have seen innovation in a way that could really drive, and for us is absolutely driving interprofessional and cross-country, cross-world training in a way that we've never seen before. But we're going to have to absolutely think beyond that. It's not going to happen organically necessarily. Some places it will, without a doubt, but it's going to need some steerage, it's going to need some thought and some intelligent application. We're going to need to reassure people of the evidence base. I mean, the evidence base that Andreas has been talking us through, we know that, we see it, but we have to keep reminding people, because somehow within us, maybe we don't quite remember it or believe it, but there's something that's holding us back from driving that as a huge patient safety agenda. We have got to embrace the evidence base, courageously move forward, but this catalyst for change is going to have to be harnessed. I don't know it's going to be enough to drive the change we need to see in pre-registration training. And I think the issue for us is we've got some really interesting little catalysts happening. We've got the drive towards simulation, blended learning, some really exciting opportunities. But if we put a group of nurses into a pseudo operating theatre to run out some role play of each being each other, we've missed the opportunity of the simulated operating theatre where we bring the ODP students in, we bring the nurses in, we bring the medics in, or we have a rehab suite where the whole multi-professional team, and we learn together. But here we get to a stage where we're potentially having a discussion about who gets a simulation suite on a Thursday afternoon. Is it the nurses, is it the midwives, or the physios? No, it's all of us doing a mental health scenario together, playing our parts, learning together to value each other. So absolutely, I share the positivity, but I think it's going to need, as ever, the ability to coax it along. And I think that, you know, there are so many different ways that we can do that. We need to think that through together. But I think also the risk for me of our Zoom world is we still need relationships. We still need to see the whites of each other's eyes. We still need to bond as humans in the moment. And we know that so much of interprofessional learning is not just, you know, I really respect you, Anne, as a pharmacist. I can see your clinical brilliance. That's great. But for Anne and I to know that Anne likes sailing and that, you know, the things that matter to Anne in a way that in a formal setting like this on Zoom, you never learn that stuff, although we've managed it quite well tonight. But generally, it's harder to learn than if we were stood by the coffee machine walking between lectures or sessions together. So there's a real issue for us of we have the most phenomenal moment of change, but it's going to have to be enabled. It's going to need to be intelligently thought through. Otherwise, we run the risk of a blunt response and we don't capitalise on this amazing unforeseen moment of change. So my plea is for coaxing and building on the moment, not hoping organically it's going to happen.
Great, thank you, Beverly. And then last but not least, Anne, do you want to leave us with some closing thoughts?
I mean, I think it's been a really constructive discussion, and there's lots of things come out. I mean, I've already managed to move people towards 5-minute planning and everything else, so I consider that a huge success. But I do hear what Beverly's saying, and I think that, people don't like change, and I think that we have to be mindful of some of those bumpy, blowy, out of port experiences, for want of a better word. But something that I learned and really was marvelled at was the work that Katerina had done with 150 Leaders programme. And I think that that's the essence. Students, well, I've not met it. The students are incredibly bright. They are our future. They are our hope carriers. Not to put too much pressure on them, but I have hope in the students of today producing wonderful healthcare systems of the future. And I think that the art in all of this and discussion is to enable them to do it in a way that harnesses social media. I mean, you only need to follow We Student Nurses, and their GIF game is the best in the business. And I've tweeted that, and it's like, wow, I can learn from them. What they do and how they engage is incredibly unique. And I think the challenge is in harnessing and allowing others to learn and harness in their own professions. But this shared purpose that we all embrace is to protect and promote the health of our patients and our population. And I think it comes back to that very firm belief that is a driver for me. So if it's a crisis, as a pharmacist, I want to contribute. If I was a nurse, I'd be able to contribute that. The coming together, the sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts. And to me, that stronger together message needs to resonate across student doctors, student nurses, student allied health professionals, and the student social workers and all the other mix that comes in together, because that gives us all purpose then. And so if Beverly said, look, Anne, can you help me with this because I've got, the answer's always going to be yes. No matter how stressed or busy I am as an individual clinician, that there's a purpose behind the ask, or there's a purpose behind that connectivity. But I think also we have to take it into the modern world of connecting in different ways. The world will never be the same, but online classes and online tuition has given us opportunities and open doors. We need to go through those doors and see what other doors are available to us. And I think the students are the key holders. I think that they're almost like the litmus test of how we move through these doors in a very exciting way. And I'd just like to say I wish every single student of the future the very best wishes, because that's where it's at. And I think it is up to us to be timely, effective, provide the scaffolding, provide the expertise that we've got from the work Beverly's done and Katerina to really pull this together, because that is a compelling vision, in my opinion anyway.
Thank you, Anne, that's great. I think that kind of brings it to a close. I feel very privileged to have been a bit of a fly on the wall during this discussion this evening. It's been brilliant. And I think just a note from me to those who are listening: take those points which have come out of that last discussion, out of the whole discussion, and think how tomorrow you can go back to where you are. Maybe it's if you're a student, your healthcare school, if you're a physio working like me, or if you're a policy maker, because I'm sure we can all take some of the points that have come out this evening to make change. And then a little bit of a plug, there'll also be a Twitter chat, Twitter chat, whatever you'd like to call it, just after this on the HLA Live channel. So come over and join us. We may have some of the speakers there as well, and we can discuss some of these points a little bit more.
Thank you to everyone that made tonight's episode possible. Whenever our scholars are thinking about complex problems facing our health systems, we encourage them to think about how they make significant change in the world of healthcare. We are incredibly lucky to have some incredible scholars in the HLA. They use the HLA as a platform to take their ideas and bring them to fruition. If you are interested in the work of the HLA, why not join us at one of our future HLA events? Why not join one of our programs? Why not even become a HLA scholar? Thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Marliner, the director of the HLA, and it's a good night from all of us.